Okay, so I'm Julian Hawkins, for the visitors who don't know my name. I teach digital photography here at Ravensbourne, and we'd like to say a big welcome, first of all, to the visitors we have from the Royal Photographic Society, because this is the first of the talks we've done with the RPS, which we're doing as part of their Women in Photography series, which is taking place throughout this year at different colleges and institutions around the UK. And this evening we have the pleasure of having Kajal Nisha here to talk to us. She's come down from Leicester especially. I'm not going to say anything more. I'm going to hand over to her and let her tell us all about her work. Okay? Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that introduction, Julian. Thank you also, everyone, for coming, and to the university, and also for the Royal Photographic Society for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. So I'm going to be talking about various aspects of the kind of work that I do. I would predominantly call myself a photographer. I predominantly call myself a photographer, but I also do all of these things because I'm freelance. So when you're freelance, you end up doing quite a lot of different things yourself. You're more of an enterprise, I guess. You have to pick up quite a lot of skills in order to run your business economically. But I'll talk to you a little bit more about those things later. So I'm going to be talking about some of my personal projects first of all. My first project this is the longest running project I've been doing for about 10 years on and off. It's called the Golden Mile. And so the Golden Mile is basically a long stretch of road in Leicester. And it was recently remarketed and rebranded as the Golden Mile. It's actually called Belgrave Road. But one of the reasons why they rebranded it is because it's quite a large tourist attraction that draws in thousands of people from all over the country to do shopping. There's all sorts of gold shops and sari shops and restaurants and all of the kinds of businesses. So it's quite an affluent area because of the migrant population. It didn't always used to be like that, though. It used to be quite a heavily a slum area, and the migrant population have really regenerated the area through their businesses. So it's over time, after the First World War, it's attracted different waves of migrants, and the biggest wave of migrants was in 1972. They came via East Africa, a place called Uganda, and they were originally from India. So they came because there was a dictator named General Idi Amin, and he expelled all of the Gujarati community. There was around about 30,000 people who were expelled, and they came to Leicester because the Leicester City Council actually placed an advert in a popular publication to ask the people not to come to Leicester. But the advert actually had the opposite effect, and all of a sudden people had a reference point and they decided to come to Leicester. So that's one of the reasons why so many people are there. So during the beginning of my photographic journey, I was doing a lot of, I was just with my camera all the time, going up to all sorts of different places, but this is actually a friend's wedding, one of my best friend's wedding in the corner, just there. And it was one of those, you'll find this yourself probably, where you get invited to a lot of different places, and yeah, it'd be nice if you bring your camera along. So people generally like to have a free photographer. That's what I was on the day. So the pictures served me quite well, though, because it's been published quite widely. It ended up in The Economist last year and a couple of other places too. So it was a good thing I did take my camera that day. And also, it's quite nice to be in these situations without being paid sometimes, because you don't have the pressure to deliver as a commissioned photographer. So you can take the kind of photographs that you want to take. But this is the approach I've ended up taking anyway as well. I do weddings now and then, but I tend to use the same sort of style, which is a kind of reportage style in even my commissioned work too. So again, going back to, you know, how I was taking photographs in the beginning, I'd go to a lot of different events. So this was actually taken at a wedding fair. I don't even know why I'd go to half these places, but it was just to see what was going on in the community. So these girls had just come off the catwalk. They were actually advertising some flowers. So yeah, you know, at the time, I think it was quite a boring event, but it was quite nice to get pictures like this. So I kind of ended up at a lot of public festivals. So this was an Indian summer festival. It's a cultural event that's celebrated every year, started by a couple of young friends, and they wanted to bring an alternative view of India into Leicester. So it's an annual event and celebrating all sorts of cultural festivals that happen in India. So this is celebrating a festival called Holi. So again, this is taken in another annual event called Navaratri, which basically means 9 nights, and it's a festival of dance, and it's celebrated without any kind of stimulants such as alcohol or drugs or anything. People dance into the early hours of the morning, generally just drinking water. So here's the bar for the water. So this was taken at a community hall. And in the beginning, when I was taking this picture, I was trying to exclude the yellow bars on the ceiling, but then I realized that they were actually quite significant in the scene, because this is actually a new migrant community. Some of the more established communities, they pool together money and they buy out a hall, and this is a new migrant community, so they still hire these venues from the local council, and they hold their cultural events there. But also, I think that was the 3rd year that I've been documenting this particular festival, and as I spent more time there, I started to focus more around the contribution of women and the role that women play within these communities, within these festivals, and how they are keeping the kind of spiritual traditions alive. This is a friend of mine. He's a classical Indian dancer. So he's classically trained, but he's enjoying a lot of success at the moment because he's fused his Indian style of dancing with a Western style. So it's quite a contemporary style that he's doing. So he's one of the people that has really, you know, I'm looking at younger generation and how they are assimilating themselves into the British culture whilst also holding on to their identity. So I'm quite interested in the stories surrounding people like this. So these are just a few pictures of the same festival that I referred to earlier, the nine nights. It's actually, the whole festival is actually a celebration of the female power. So I'm just naturally drawn to stories around women anyway, but it was quite nice to find out that this festival was actually about that. So this is the end of the night, as you would normally go to a burger van. We do the same things at the end of these events too. And again, I'm sort of looking at different aspects of the festival, and now fashion is something is really, I'm quite interested in how people are fusing Eastern styles with their Western style of dress. So I'm quite interested in textiles because my mum used to work in the textiles and hosiery industry when I was growing up. So this leads me on to my next project, which is called Trade. So the last project that I described was really looking at the social landscape of Leicester and how and why people moved to Britain in the first place. Stories around poverty, rural poverty in India, and British colonial rule, and how people were really forced to leave their homelands because there was dire poverty in India, but also because India was part of the British Empire, they had citizen rights to actually move and work here. But as I started looking around Leicester more, I started becoming interested in the landscape, the physical landscape, and as I mentioned, my mum worked in the factories when I was growing up, and we couldn't really afford a babysitter at the time, so I'd spend a lot of time in those factories after school, in summer holidays, just hanging around these factories, you know, waiting for my mum to finish work, which was really, really boring at the time. But yes, ironically, I've spent most of my time trying to get back into these factories nowadays because I'm really looking at the links between, you know, the trade links, the economic links now between the UK and India, and the fall of an industry which was basically what manufacturing and industry, which is basically what Britain's, you know, empire was built upon. So these are just a few slides from the project. So this is quite a common thing in Leicester. A lot of these buildings are actually listed buildings, so they're very expensive to redevelop. A lot of the buildings have been turned and converted into artist studios, for instance, and student accommodation, but we're just inundated. The market is saturated now with student accommodation. A lot of these places have been bulldozed as well, so in order to get insurance, a lot of the buildings have been set on fire in the middle of the night. It's quite a common thing to see this sort of thing going on. As I mentioned, there's a lot of them are just being bulldozed in order to clear the land for more profitable businesses and low-income houses as well. So this is one of the new housing estates, which I don't really know how to describe it, but it's, you know, there's lack of green space, and I'm quite interested in the area, the gentrification of such environments here, because once upon a time these places would have employed thousands of people, but now they're very grey, sort of desolate spaces with hardly any green space for the children to play out on. Yeah, so it just, you know, kind of makes me think about, you know, the children that are coming from hotter climates and, you know, probably from really open spaces and, you know, spending their time in places like this, and the kind of effect this has on these young people. Which really leads me on to my next project, which was, again, it's linked to the last project because I'm interested in the textiles and the trade between the two countries. So I really kind of stumbled upon that project because I was given an artist bursary from an organisation called Snibston. It's a museum in a place called Colville, just outside of Leicester. So as the name suggests, the town it used to have an old colliery site, and the majority of people that would have lived in Colville would have worked at the colliery. But in the 1980s, most of the pits were closed down, and a lot of the towns that thrived because of the coal mining industry just became they were devastated because all of the income was taken out, all the jobs were lost. So basically, Snibston was going through a transformation. Nobody was really visiting the museum, so they were giving out some artist bursaries in order to bring new audiences into the museum. So I was given a bursary, and at the time I was looking at the textiles industry in Leicester. So I was really following a rather tenuous link, because I was going to India anyway. It was a very small bursary, so I was trying to find a way to connect my textile series in Leicester to the coal mining industry. So I ended up in a factory in India, because some of these factories still use coal. So it was a very, very short trip around this factory. I think I was only there for about 3 hours. Like I said, it was a rather tenuous link because of the coal. It felt like it at the time, but as you know, I've done more work on this project, I've realised, you know, how important those kinds of little corners, I call them corners, when you turn a corner in your project and, you know, you realise that this is something so much bigger, and it became that's when it became the trade project, because some of the pictures that you saw from the Leicester series of the industries and factories, they were taken after I'd been to this Indian factory. So the thinking kind of evolved from just looking at buildings to how do these two countries connect, and looking at the infrastructure as well in India, which is just not as developed as the British landscape, and the electricity. You know, there's so many villages in India that don't have proper electricity. They just don't have the infrastructure. This was taken in a different factory in my ancestral village. It's called Navsari. So my mother and father were both born there, and they make jeans for all the big companies, Wrangler, Levi's, etc. My granddad used to actually be a foreman there, so you know, I'm really keen to try and get back into this factory. I've really struggled a little bit, but for me it was quite important to go back to these particular places. So going back to ideas around identity, I'm really trying to understand what is British Asian identity, British Indian identity, but what I'm coming to realise is if I want to know what British Indian identity is, I have to try and understand what Indian identity is, but it's really quite complicated because India was under British rule for nearly 200 years, around about 200 years, so there's a big question mark over what is really truly Indian anyway. So as part of this anyway, I'm interviewing young people in India and finding out about, you know, what kind of hopes, dreams and aspirations they have, asking them really simple questions like, what kind of clothes do you prefer to wear, British or Indian clothes? And I was talking to one chap who was wearing a shirt and trousers, and I said, well, you know, he says, and he didn't actually realise that he was wearing a Western outfit, because the Indian outfit is obviously quite different. No men wear Indian outfits nowadays, so it's quite interesting to see because a lot of Indian people, Indian lads, especially at the cultural festivals, actually choose to wear Indian outfits nowadays. So it's interesting to see how the East looks to the West and the West looks to the East. It's just another picture from the fabric series. So I just want to talk to you a bit now about how I actually earn a living. So I'm starting to find really good opportunities. I've been presented with quite a few excellent opportunities as a result of the personal work that I've done. So I work quite a lot with socially driven organisations. This particular project was commissioned by someone called the Racial Equality Council, so it was about dispelling stereotypes. So it was quite a nice commission. It was quite a short one, but you know, it was quite nice to have budgets to work on, you know, large-scale projects like this. So this was in a place called the Curve Theatre. And it's quite nice to work with small organisations as well, because you have a lot of creative freedom when you're working with smaller organisations. For instance, it was my idea to put forward to have some sort of keepsake memory. They had some money left over, so they really just gave me the budget and said, okay, if you want to work with your own designers and basically put together a publication. So that was a really nice thing to have at the end of a project, especially when you're going to new clients. Like I said earlier, you know, it's about being entrepreneurial and being able to find opportunities to present something that you've got from old projects is really helpful. So this leads me on to a different project that I did. It started at the beginning of this year, and Mansfield is basically a little bit like the other town that I described, Colville. So Mansfield is just north of Nottinghamshire, and it used to also have quite a lot of colliery sites. So after the pits were closed down, I think there's one remaining now, the place was absolutely devastated. There's been no real effort by the government to do any kind of regeneration in the area. So, you know, this project is called First Art. It's a nationwide project, and the commissioning body, what they're trying to do is engage new audiences into art. So they're mapping the different geographical areas where there's a lot of deprivation. So that this was actually the launch of the project. It's an Arts Council funded project. So myself and a friend of mine called David Severn, he's been documenting the decline of the colliery sites. His dad was actually a coal miner. So David and I were working together anyway, because he lives in Mansfield. He's actually born and brought up in Mansfield. So we were working together anyway, but then it was really nice when we were both contacted by this organisation to come and do this project, to look at the project is actually called Portrait. So to really build up a portrait of quite a large geographical area actually, and to see what is actually happening in the area. But what they wanted us to do is to project a positive image of the place, because it has quite a lot of negative press. You know, it's one of these small towns which seems to have been forgotten about, and you know, there's a lot of, well, it's projected to be the kind of place where young people are a bit of a menace, but having spent that time there, I can tell you that it's not like that at all. There's actually, people are the same wherever you go. They have the same sort of hopes, dreams, ambitions to do well, and so I ended up, because of my interest in textiles, there's a couple of factories left, textiles factories left in Mansfield, and I ended up there. I ended up at this factory. It's called David Nieper, and when I saw the kind of clothes that they were making, their market is basically 50 years plus, and it was a really odd, it was like they were stuck in time. But what I wanted to do is to try and highlight some of what I thought was really interesting about the fabric, and so this was a group of staged portraits, and I'd asked the employees of the place to actually pose for the portraits. It was a makeshift studio. It was literally a clothing rail, and I asked the ladies to choose their own fabric to be photographed however they wanted, really. So it was quite a nice opportunity again to put my own creativity into a project like this. So I wanted to do quite a few different styles of photography within this project, because overall they wanted 66 images which were going to be put in an outdoor exhibition. So that's quite a lot of images, and I wanted to have different types of images to show not just the textiles factory. There was a few other elements that I did, but within even textiles I wanted a few different styles. And again, it was just, you know, I tried to pick up on some of the nuances of the place. So this is a lady that had gone into hospital. So, you know, I'm really trying to show the kind of culture that exists in these kinds of places. You know, people really care about each other, and they've been working there. Some of the women have been working there for over 30 years, so they've got a real strong community, and, you know, they really depend on each other. So those are the kinds of things that I was really interested in. So this is chalk, if people don't know. They use it to draw on the fabrics. It washes off. This is probably my favourite picture from the series. Her name's Frances. So I was kind of panicking a little bit towards the end of the project because I needed more pictures, and this was taken on a Friday afternoon. So all the employees leave, they leave the factory quite early on a Friday. So I managed to get hold. There was about 3 or 4 women left in the office, and Frances is really shy. So I asked a couple of the women. Nobody really wanted to be photographed, but Frances agreed. And because I'd been asking some of the women, all the women, to pick their own fabrics, and, you know, they were quite lengthy, and they were taking quite a long time to select their fabrics, whereas Frances immediately told me she wanted the Monet fabric. So it took us about 15 minutes. We were looking for this huge storeroom for this fabric, and we couldn't find it. And Frances, being really shy, she didn't want to put me out, so she said, no, it's okay, we'll find another fabric. But there was something in my head that said, we have to find this fabric, because of the fact that she'd asked for this by name. So I went to the offices, and as I said, everybody was leaving, and they were pretty much gone. But we managed to locate the fabric, and you know, I came out with this portrait, which I think really, one of the reasons why I wanted to ask the women to pick their own fabrics is because I wanted to show the connection that they have with these materials. And again, I think it really shows a certain part of her character. So what I'm trying to basically say is that sometimes even on paid commissions, you know, you have this kind of burst of creative energy, and really follow it if you can, because it normally leads to something quite good. So here's a few images of the installation in Mansfield city centre. So leading on to other work that I've done, I've been working in education for the last 9 years now. I started working in schools and community spaces, teaching photography. So I kind of wanted to go beyond just doing one-off workshops. I wanted to give my students a little bit more than just a one-off workshop. So I set up a social enterprise called Lightseekers, and that really gave me the freedom to start applying for funding and delivering more long-term projects and having more of an investment into the long-term futures of the students and to see where they were going to go with their photography in the future. And one of the reasons I wanted to, so one of the first projects I did with Lightseekers was, it was called Touring Schools exhibition, and I documented some rag pickers in India, people who collect litter in the streets. So we'd printed these images onto foam boards, and we were asking the children to respond to the images. And what I realised was that the children were going away with a very negative kind of view of India, that it's all about poverty, and I really didn't want that because obviously I'd seen other things, so I wanted to give them an idea of the other side of India, you know. And that's really why I established Lightseekers, to give them a more kind of balanced view of the place. So I'm just going to play a little video for you now.
Connecting Cultures is an education project which combines photography, writing and storytelling to connect children from different countries so they can learn about each other's lives. We're currently working with students in the UK and India to develop photography and storytelling skills. Students engage in creative activities and learn about how children live in other countries. They consequently have a better understanding of the world. Through this work, students are encouraged to think about important social issues such as poverty and the importance of education. I met Nisha last year. She was a natural leader and was interested to learn about the project and our purpose at her school.
તમે લંડન જઈને શું કરો આ ફોટા શોખ માટે કે પછી કામ માટે મારે તો જેટલું શીખવે તેટલું કાજલ દીદી શીખવે મારે શીખવું જ છે ફોટોગ્રાફી કેમ કે મારે ભણીને નહીં થાય તો મારે ફોટોગ્રાફર બી બનવું છે કાજલ દીદી જેવું.
Nisha assisted me in covering an important event at the school one day. She has a natural eye for photography. She told me that teachers usually photograph such events on their camera phones. Nisha is now using donated cameras to document school events. Art is currently not on the students' curriculum. We are keen to introduce photography so that these skills can be applied in the real world. We anticipate that photography will be recognised as a serious profession and a valuable addition to the students' education. Our aim is to facilitate students to participate in a cross-cultural exchange using letters and photographs. We see this as an important cultural exchange and an opportunity to learn from each other.
Okay, good. It's gone back to where I wanted it to. So yeah, that just gives you hopefully an insight into the kind of ambition I have for Lightseekers. One of the reasons I set up Lightseekers was because I thought the young people in Britain were really losing their connection with their ancestry. So one of the projects I'm doing with a primary school is interviews, and they're audio interviews where children are interviewing their own ancestors to record stories about how and why they came to Britain, and then using that content and taking photographs and making short films. They're called photo films. So there's all sorts of different projects that around. There's creative writing, and there's all sorts of different skills that can be learned through photography and this kind of activity. So this is one of my long-term students. Her name's Iman Hakim. I've been mentoring her for the last 5 years, and she is 18 years old now. When I started, she was only 14, but she's actually doing really well. She's earning money through photography, and she's going to Birmingham City University in a couple of months. So, you know, it's really good to see the result of a long-term mentoring partnership, really. So one project that we've just completed, myself and Iman, was an exhibition. We made a joint application for some funding from an organisation called Ideas Tap. So unfortunately, Ideas Tap is closing down now, but they give out all sorts of different bursaries and funding for these kinds of projects. So this particular project was aimed towards young people between the ages of 16 and 22, and it was an enterprise grant really for them to go off and do something interesting. So what we basically did was curate an exhibition. Well, she led it, in fact. I just gave her the more kind of practical advice, made the connections for her. So she basically took a body of work which was collected through it was an archive that was available through something called the Asian Women Photographers Showcase, and it's an archive of work that's been collected from all over the world by a curator in Japan called Yumi Goto. So she wanted to set up a platform for emerging Asian female photographers who don't really have the right kind of access to show their work internationally. So that's been running for about 4 years now, but I was shortlisted a few years ago, and that gave me access to this archive, which I then gave to my student, Iman, and she curated this exhibition. I was really quite pleasantly surprised at how well she was able to bring out a theme. She came out with a really, really strong theme, and it's really great to see the results of a long-term partnership like that. And I'm really at a stage now where I'm learning quite a lot from Iman, so I'm quite excited to see where this kind of partnership is going to go. And it's really good to have long-term assistants as well, because they understand your own growth as well, and they help you out. Sometimes when I need an assistant, she helps me out, so it's quite nice to have that. And again, I'm quite interested in dissemination of work into different areas. So this particular project, we invited one of the photographers called Palumi Basu. She's one of India's leading photojournalists. She happened to be in the country at the time, so we invited her to do a talk at the end. And yeah, it went really well because of her attendance. We were able to promote our little project to all across the world. It was promoted through different photo agencies like Seven, and for us that was a really big thing. You know, they tweeted about it, and they sent these tweets to 92,000 people, so you know, that was a really big thing for us. So within this panel, we have some really interesting people. We have the curator of a contemporary art gallery called the New Art Exchange in Nottingham, a community news channel reporter. So again, it's about collaboration. You know, collaboration it goes a long way. And going back to the idea of dissemination, taking artwork into public spaces is something that's quite important for Lightseekers, and not just preaching to the converted. Showing work in venues where a wider audience can see it, because it leads to all sorts of opportunities. And again, collaboration, I can't drill this home enough, really. It's, for me, it's been really important. It's my Golden Mile project. It was selected. A lot of the work was selected as part of an open call by somebody called the Migration Museum Project. So the Migration Museum Project, what they're trying to do is establish the first museum of migration in Britain to celebrate migration. So they did an open call a few years ago and they were asking for 100 images, of which 20 of mine were selected. So what they're doing is they're giving this archive out to all sorts of different organisations to curate it into something interesting. So the Leicester University, basically, as a PhD student who took on this archive and did something interesting with it. So myself being in Leicester and considering that 20% of the archive was actually made in Leicester, it presented me with a really unique opportunity, and I became a bit of a spokesperson for this particular project. So they did an installation within the department of the School of Museum Studies, and they did all sorts of different themes around it. So again, it was quite an interesting way to use a public space. So the project was actually called Museums Alive, and what they were trying to do is look at the city itself as a living, breathing organism. So the School of Museum Studies in Leicester is one of the best courses in the world for that particular area of study, sorry. So what they're trying to do is explore new ways of engaging audiences, and because of the work that I'd done around the textiles and hosiery industry, again, it presented me with another opportunity within this project to lead a tour around Leicester. So I led a group of academics and also members of the public around Leicester to look at the industrial buildings and the heritage of Leicester. So that was really nice, you know, that got me onto Central News. That was quite good. Again, collaboration. So for me, this particular project has been really important because I really struggled with my confidence in the beginning, and a lot of it was because I was self-taught and I didn't really feel like I was very critically engaged with photography. But the fact that I've done all these projects now and I'm working with universities in a completely different way has been really great for you know, my career progression. And hopefully, I mean, I'm kind of looking at doing a PhD at the moment, and you know, because of the existing partnerships that I have, you know, I have more of a chance of doing something like that without actually having any kind of qualification in photography. So one of the last points I wanted to talk about is social media and how important social media is to build a public profile for yourself. I really use I use Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and sometimes Tumblr. I really recommend to use the kind of platforms that work for you the best. You know, it shouldn't feel like a job. Social media has a way of absorbing you, and if you're not careful, it can take over your life. So, you know, be careful about how much time you spend on there, and you know, especially as freelancers, a lot of us work from home, so you can end up on Twitter just, you know, having conversations when, you know, really be careful about the kind of time that you're spending on there, and it has to be constructive. So I use the different platforms because I can engage different types of audiences through different platforms. Facebook is more social, but again, you know, there's all types of different social organizations, whereas the more serious kind of clients, you could say, use Twitter and Instagram. One of the photo editors from the New York Times told me that she actually pays more attention to what's on her Instagram feed than what lands on her desk. So that's a really important thing to consider as a photographer. So I just wanted to understand from you guys, really, you know, I'm, you know, probably a bit of a dinosaur compared to you guys in terms of how social media is evolving, and working sort of collaboratively with other students. I'm just interested to know, you know, how many of you are working with other students. I know it happens quite a lot in fashion, but what about, you know, other kind of, I'm using photography to explore ideas. That's what I'm interested in, so I'm quite interested to know if any of you guys are actually working with writers, or any can I just have a quick show of hands if anyone's working with other than oh right, okay, that's interesting. So I came across an article the other day, and there's a college in America, and what they've done is they've basically abandoned their college website, and they're now using Twitter and something called Medium exclusively to publish their stories, which I think is a really interesting kind of move, and the way that journalism is evolving, and it just makes the content more accessible to a wider public. And universities are quite notorious. I think London's a little bit different, but especially when you have universities in smaller towns, there's a place called Loughborough, and the university students and lifestyle is quite disconnected from what goes on in the community, and the students are considered a bit of a menace, actually. Of course, they're going to be enjoying a good time, but the thing is, I think there's a real gap there in the local community working with the university students towards, shared goals. So what this college has done by using Medium is they are able to report on community issues, which is a really, really valuable resource for the local community, because funding is getting less and less for old news outlets like the news, even news channels or print. So I think students, people like yourselves, are in a really, unique position to be out there as citizen journalists. I don't know how much you guys follow sort of, recent happenings around police brutality, for instance. There's more and more stories being reported by members of the public, and that's basically citizen journalism. So it's interesting to see students using platforms like Medium to report stories where they no longer become just random videos posted to the net. They actually become newsworthy. So I think there's really important, there's a really important opportunity there that more people could explore. But yeah, sort of on a less serious kind of side, looking again at social media, I've been using Instagram now for the last couple of years, and I'm kind of really trying to now use it to create a bit of an identity. This started off as a bit of a fun series for me about a year and a half ago. I've got my own unique hashtag, which is Kaji's Restroom Diaries. So this was taken at a wedding. It was a really boring wedding, and Indian weddings can be really long and drawn out and really elaborate. So I found myself in the Hilton. And so this is the first image I took in that series, and I remember feeling really sort of like disconnected from it all at the time. But I mean, at the time, it was a really nice thing to just be able to post it on Instagram and get a few likes, and also like, okay, just have that interaction. But as this series has progressed, I'm really using Instagram and these kinds of images to build an identity and build a project which is basically about self-representation. And I'm quite interested in the representation of women, and particularly the representation of Indian women. I guess you all know perhaps about the brutal rape in Delhi a few years ago, and this really has thrown up a lot of issues around the way that the media presents and projects Indian women. And what I'm interested in is how this in turn affects the way that Indian women see themselves. So this kind of dialogue that I'm having with my audience on Instagram, and in a way I'm kind of having this dialogue with myself. I'm kind of using Instagram as a platform to build new ideas and build new work around representation of myself. So this is just a few stills from the series. They're just all taken on my phone. New York. So yeah, I'm starting to be a little bit more daring with these images now, just kind of, again, I'm sort of looking at different aspects of what layers of that I want to kind of explore within myself. So it's more of a conceptual project for me, and how I'm kind of learning more about myself, and how I'm projecting myself to to my friends and whoever wants to see, really. So yeah, I guess this particular one, there was two images, and I chose to present the one where I was looking. I purposely was feeling more confident in this particular image. So it was just that, again, it was that dialogue that I was having with myself. London St Pancras. So again, just going back to what I said in the first place is, being a photographer, it's not just about being a photographer. You do acquire all sorts of different skills along the way. I've been a professional photographer now for about 8 or 9 years, This is the first year that I've actually used an accountant, so that was a really big step for me. I guess you do a lot of the stuff in the beginning yourself to save money, and it's a really good thing to do that because you learn, you build up a really good working knowledge of all of these different things that you need to run your business effectively. But also what it means is when you do need to talk to people that you're going to be commissioning and paying your hard-earned money to, it means that you have a good working knowledge of the kind of thing that you expect. So, you know, I do recommend, you know, I guess most of you probably do build your own websites and things like that. But yeah, this is just some of the things that I end up doing. So I think that's my last slide. So I'm ready for questions if anybody wants.
Have I got this sound? No. Okay, I haven't got it, doesn't matter. Yes? Oh, that's easier. Okay. Thank you very much, Kaj. That was great, really informative. Good stuff. I hope you guys find it useful. The floor's open to questions. What sort of questions would you like to ask? Are you going to go look at me? Or have I got to start? No, I'm not starting. You guys got to come up with some questions. I've done lots of questions and answers today. Looks like I'm next.
Hey, thank you very much. It was great talk, yeah, very informative. I think kind of different question. What kind of lens do you normally use? Like, having lens like 50 mil. What's your favorite?
My favorite
documentary.
Well, my favorite lens at the moment is probably a 40mm 2.8. It's a really lovely little walkabout lens, and it's really light because I'm a dinosaur now, and I can't. It's really lightweight, and you know, I've got another one which is a 24-70, which is really great across the board when you're doing, you know, all sorts of commissioned work. But I really like the 40mm 2.8 because it's small and you can get really nice range, a dynamic range within that, and it's really lightweight. Whereas the 24-70 kills my back, you know.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, what cameras do you use?
I use the 5D Mark II, and that's it. But I wish I could just use my phone. They're getting better though, you know. I'm an avid Android user, and Android are going to be releasing raw technology. This is exclusively digital, isn't it, to all the students, right? Everyone's using it. So I read that Android are going to be releasing raw software on their camera phones, so I'm really excited about that. It means I don't have to lug all this stuff around with me. Yeah.
Have you thought about publishing a book?
Yes, I have. It's on my growing list of things to do. So yeah, definitely I'd like to do that. And you know, I'm kind of moving into a more kind of conceptual direction right now. You know, all of my work so far has been pretty much documentary and reportage, and I'm kind of looking into more crafts-based things, you know, using crafted material. When I was at school, I was really into all sorts of different things, ceramics and textiles, and I actually studied industrial design at university. So I'm quite interested in using, you know, different technologies and different materials and things like that, not just a paper-based book. So yeah, I'm kind of looking towards that.
And if I can do another question, what are you going to explore, let's say, more with your PhD, if you could say more about this?
Well, at the moment, I think I'm really interested in the representation of Indian women. So I'm doing a project at the moment with Loughborough University, and it's been a really fantastic opportunity because they've given me pretty much free rein in all they've said is it has to be about Loughborough, and it's about heritage and history. So again, I've kind of gravitated towards Indian women. So I'm looking at the moment towards the first generation of Indian women, people like my mother, and what kind of issues they would have had to have faced working in the factories, for instance, balancing that kind of home, the expectation of duty, you know, because when Indian women first moved to the country, they'd be living with their in-laws. So, you know, there was all the duties involved with doing things for their in-laws, plus, you know, bringing up their children in a decent, moral Indian way. But then there was also the fact that they had to go to work 9 to 5 and be told what to do by the factory owners as well. So this project I'm kind of exploring about the role of Indian women and how they managed to kind of stay sane at the end of it, you could say. So I'm kind of, yeah, that's the direction I'm kind of going in, perhaps, with my PhD. But it's early days yet, so yeah, fingers crossed.
In terms of your, when you first started, how did you get recognition? What was your first recognition?
My first recognition, actually, well, funnily enough, I won a competition with the Daily Telegraph, and they were basically, it was in conjunction with the Singapore Tourism Board, and they wanted to take some photographers, amateur photographers, out to Singapore. So that was the prize. So I submitted a photograph, you know, at the time, true Kaj style. It was like, the deadline was like midnight, and I think I submitted it at 5 minutes to. But I got in anyways. 10 of us were shortlisted, and we were all taken to Singapore to take photographs of culture in Singapore. But coincidentally, it was actually one of the photographers, I think she had to pull out in the end, called Abby Traylor-Smith. And if you know, she's she won the World Press Photo Award last year, but she became a really good friend of mine. So she came with us, and she was guiding us on how to take better photographs. So that was my first opportunity, really, spending 5 days it was an amazing trip. It was 5-star all the way, you know, and I was like, how on earth have I got here, you know, given that I just submitted so late and all the rest of it. So that was a really great thing for me. It was a real boost that, oh yeah, I do know how to take a picture. So I stayed in touch with Abby, basically. And Abby was the first and only person I knew who was working in the industry around the kind of photography that I was enjoying doing. So I think staying in touch with her really helped me to keep my ear to the ground and see what kind of work. And that was 10 years ago, where people weren't really using the internet as much as they do now. So that opportunity led to a whole world of other things, you know.
Have you done a long-term project abroad, and what was it for? Was it personal, or was it based on commission?
Yeah, I have actually. Well, the fabric project is kind of part of it, but I'm also looking at, I'm looking at, it's another personal project actually. It's called Protection, and it's about myself. It sounds really narcissistic when I say that, but yeah, it's basically about myself, and it's basically about the experiences I have of, you know, riding that kind of area between the East and the West, but it's how I'm connected with India itself. Actually, in fact, that was some of the first work I produced in India as well. One of the things I noticed when I was in India is how close people are physically, and it's something to do probably with the fact that it's overpopulated and people are living in close proximity with one another. But you know, the thing is, referencing that with the British kind of environment, you know, it was quite an interesting, it really hits you in the face how close people are. You know, I think here we psychoanalyze things a lot, but I think physically, you know, there is a kind of boundary we have around ourselves, whereas in India, you know, they don't talk about things to death, but they have a real reliance on each other. The community is quite strong. So that's something that I'm kind of looking at within that series. So yeah, there's a video of it on my website actually. It's called Protection in the video section, so you can have a little look.
Sorry, one more question. I've got a lot of questions, but what was, like, when you started becoming a photographer, what was your biggest fear, and how did you overcome it?
Oh God, my biggest fear? I don't know, I think you have to be a bit fearless, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I don't know, I think that's probably one of the reasons why I'm able to stand here and talk to you today, because they were probably my dad, actually, if I really had to answer that honestly. Because, you know, Indian people don't really support the arts, you know, they think I'm insane. And, you know, yeah, I think him sort of telling me that I was I mean, this sounds really awful, right, thing for a father to say to his daughter, but he was basically told me I was wasting my time because he didn't understand arts, you know, because they come from a background where art isn't a thing, you know, which is funny because art is part of everyday life in India as well. If you look at everyday objects in India, they are skilled, you know, they're artisan objects, but as a career, you know, they see that as quite a low skilled thing, you know, making shoes and things like that. They would normally be, there was a hierarchy in India, and the lower down you go, you know, people like the artisan people, they were deemed to be lower class basically. So my parents always understood arts and crafts to be something that doesn't really, it's not something that's essential in Indian society. And that's why when the first wave of migrants came to England, they, you know, my generation were really pushed into being doctors and lawyers and, you know, the kind of things that a society really, really needs to function well. And these are well-paid jobs. And that's why you see a lot of doctors and engineers and things like that coming out of India. So I think for me, in some ways, you know, the fear of failing came from, you know, my dad telling me that this was a waste of time. And so I knew I had to do it properly and prove him wrong. I don't know. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it's fine. Thank you.
Have you ever faced any discrimination? And if you did, how did you deal with that?
What do you mean by discrimination?
Being a female photographer. Just
well,
because of the theme of the evening, that's all. Because women in photography, that's all.
Discrimination, well, yes, I suppose so. I mean, in some ways it's been a bit of an advantage because I think women can get away with a lot more than men can in a lot of situations. And one of my close friends, who's actually a videographer, she often gets asked, oh, is that your dad's camera? So I suppose that's kind of some sort of discrimination, which is kind of annoying in the beginning, but I guess as you grow with confidence and you know you're out there doing, you know, different things, it just, you know, it kind of just slides off your back. But yeah, I guess, you know, it is quite a patriarchal, people do have quite patriarchal attitudes towards women in traditionally male dominated industries, and unfortunately it's coming from Indian men predominantly in India. So this is something that I've been talking quite a lot about with friends who are photographers in India actually, and luckily I don't have to work professionally as a photographer in India. When I'm there, it's generally pursuing personal projects, you know. But men in the industry can be really, really cruel towards emerging female photographers because competition is really fierce in countries like that. There's not many opportunities, and especially the older community, they're very competitive to begin with, but then to see women rising to the top, it really challenges their ego because it calls into question sort of their own status, especially when it's younger Indian women. But I don't know, if it was a younger British Indian woman, then I'm not sure. But yeah, I don't know, it's really kind of quite a complex subject. But yeah, I think the worst is probably from older Indian men.
Hi, Kaj.
Hi.
Hi. I was just quite interested by that. That actually the main barrier that you faced was well, you saw it as a class barrier than something related to gender. I also I really loved your stuff about, in the factories about the fabric project. That was really sort of drawn to those photos in particular. I was quite interested that this is a very kind of a male world that you're going into in a sense, although the textile industry obviously in other areas is, you know, involves women as well. I was just wondering why were you drawn particularly to factories which seem like a very sort of a male zone? Was that something that interested you, and was it more of a challenge to you, or perhaps that wasn't a reason at all? But I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about that.
Well, I didn't know at the time that it was going to be a male-dominated factory. Well, it was I just went to the first factory that I was able to get into, that I could have access to. So I guess it was probably more male-dominated because of the fact that they use a lot of migrant labour. So there were some women in the factory, but generally they had a lot of men working there because... and it was a factory in Gujarat as well. And Gujarat is actually one of the more affluent states in India, not like Bangladesh and places like, where poverty is high. They have very overcrowded factories with a lot of seamstresses, that kind of thing. But the factory that I went to, actually, they have a real problem trying to get people to work there. They have a 25% shortage of workers in those factories because of the fact that it is quite affluent, and not people from the local area don't want to work there because the middle class is rising and they want to pursue better jobs, basically. They're not nice places to work. So a lot of the migrant labour comes in from poorer states, and I guess those poorer states have a certain culture of women staying at home and the men would go to work. So that might be one of the reasons, but I don't know, I'm not exactly sure why there is actually more men there. Because I didn't really see many people on the sewing machines there. It was more about producing fabric, which would then be taken somewhere else. And I guess there'd be dye houses, and it's more, hard manual labour. And that might be one of the reasons why there was more men there. But no, I didn't find it very daunting. I think after I went in there, a couple of years afterwards, that's when the Delhi rape thing happened. And also another photojournalist was actually raped on another factory site. Her and a male colleague were out in an abandoned factory area, and she was raped on site. And, obviously I was just being told by all my family not to go into these factories again. But the factories that I went to were pretty safe, because... but I don't know. It's a complicated issue.
And is that a continuing project? So are you going down further down the manufacturing chain to continue to? I just imagine that a very kind of expansive project that could to lead down other avenues.
Well, I've actually really struggled to get back into that factory now. The last time I was there, I was outside and I'd gotten all the permissions to go inside and everything, but I lingered around too long outside and I was photographing some of the waste collectors, etc. And a hunch was telling me, come on, just move on, get in the factory, but I didn't. For some reason, I carried on photographing outside, and the management got really worried because they were informal workers, and then I was told not to take any more pictures. So I've really struggled to get back into that factory now. But I'm kind of considering a more conceptual approach, because my cousin actually works there, and one of the ideas, and often I think the biggest kind of barriers end up being the biggest strengths of the project. So what I'm considering doing right now is sending my cousin in to the factory with a camera. Again, it's this idea about identity and the idea that he's the same age as me, and I'm really kind of considering the overriding question for me is what is lost and what is found through migration. Is my life actually any better through the process of migration? Obviously economically my life is better, but there are all sorts of other issues around, spiritually, socially, is my life better as a result of this migration? So I'm kind of just want to, understand a little bit about how my cousin is feeling and him working in these factories all day, and to get a portrait of what he might look at. So that's something I'm kind of pursuing. It would be great to go back into these factories, but I think it would be a more considered approach, rather than, because when I went into those factories, generally it was just a snapshot. It was just literally just looking at what was going on, whereas now I'd kind of be thinking a lot more deeply about what I was actually trying to do.
Okay, have we got any more questions? Or are you all questioned out? Looks like you're all questioned out, doesn't it? Oh, hang on, Richard. Go on, Richard.
Thank you very much. Sorry, last question maybe. I think it's probably obvious, but how do you get like copyright? I mean, like if you photograph like people on the street and stuff, how do you get, or like to able to publish it or to send it somewhere? How do you ask them or?
Well, I think it's one of the ongoing questions, isn't it, for people working in this kind of field. As a photographer, you pretty much take on the responsibility. If anybody asks to publish these pictures, then generally you put it on your own shoulders to say, you know what, if anything happens, then I'm responsible. The only time I've actually ever been asked for a model released is when my pictures were acquired by a local museum, and it was 2 pictures of children, and that was the only time I've actually been asked for a model release form. But other than that, most clients, I think, understand that working in this kind of field, you photograph thousands of people, you know. So, but I am now trying to go through a process of getting names, addresses, which obviously makes the whole process twice as long, but because I'm not just randomly shooting anymore, I can do that, you know. But yeah, it is quite an important thing to consider, just to cover your own back. And I suppose, especially now, you know, a lot of these images were taken 10 years ago, maybe where it wasn't such an issue. But for projects nowadays, it's probably going to get more complicated. So, you know, to cover your own back, it probably, if you can, then. But you can get these really good apps on your phone. You can just take a picture and get them to quickly sign something on the phone. So, you know, that would probably make it a lot easier too.
Okay, anybody else? No? Okay, if I stand this side, I get the lights in my eyes. Okay, well look, thank you so much, Kaj. It's been wonderful, and it's been really informative. I found probably one of the most valuable things that I heard you say all the way through was the importance of constantly shooting personal work, and always coming back to personal work. Yeah?
Yeah, because that's why you get into it in the first place, and to keep that passion alive is so important, because when you start getting into paid work, more often than not you can get into really monotonous wedding work or whatever. You might love it, that's fine, but keep that passion alive in whichever way you can.
Yeah, and I sort of second that wholeheartedly. You've got to shoot your own work, because it's got to come out of your heart. That's where it exists the most strongly. But thank you once again. A big thank you, please, for everybody, and thank you for all your participation.